In a previous lesson, we dealt with some basic concepts and definitions. In this class, we will examine various sexual practices so as to explore the concept of sexual orientation more in depth. The most authoritative document providing a terminology of this field today are the Yogyakarta Principles, drafted in 2006. It is not a treaty. These principles define sexual orientation as each person's capacity for profound emotional, affectional, and sexual attraction to, and to intimate and have sexual relations with, individuals of a different gender or the same gender or more than one gender. Yogyakarta Tenet 18 prohibits medical abuses. No person may be forced to undergo any form of medical or psychological treatment, procedure, testing, or be confined to a medical facility based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Notwithstanding any classifications to the contrary, a person's sexual orientation and gender identity are not in and of themselves medical conditions and are not to be treated, cured, or suppressed. Medicine is supposed to be about ameliorating human suffering. Yet, the history of medicine is rife with examples of wrongly defined diseases. Infamous is the past alleged disease of female hysteria, whereby women were supposed to be harboring a wandering womb that made them feel nervousness and irritability. Likewise, not long ago, the American Psychiatric Association, or APA, deemed homosexuality a mental disorder. It removed it from its Manual of Mental Disorders only in 1973. Still, the World Health Organization, or WHO, continued to consider homosexuality as a mental disorder until 1992. As regards to gender identity, the APA considered transsexualism as a mental disorder. It defined it as a desire to live and be accepted as a member of the opposite sex, usually accompanied by a sense of discomfort with or inappropriateness of one's anatomic sex, and the wish to have surgery and hormonal treatment to make one's body as congruent as possible with one's preferred sex. This characterization of transsexualism as a mental disorder has been resisted by organizations of trans people for many years. In 2013, the APA stated that this condition amounts to a gender dysphoria or discomfort, not a disorder. The critical element of gender dysphoria is the presence of clinically significant distress associated with the condition. Paraphilic disorders, or paraphilias, are characterized by the APA not as any atypical sexual interest, but only those which provoke personal distress on the person, or if they cause another person psychological distress, injury, or death, or if they involve unwilling persons or persons unable to give legal consent. According to the WHO's 1992 classification of diseases, paraphilias or disorders of sexual preference include fetishism, a sexual fixation with given objects commonly associated with the sexually desired person; fetishistic transvestism, a derivation of sexual pleasure from wearing the clothes of the opposite sex or of the desired person; exhibitionism, the compulsion to expose one's nudity or genitalia, usually to passers-by, caught off guard. Voyeurism, a preference for watching the sexual activity of others. Sadomasochism, the derivation of sexual pleasure from inflicting or receiving humiliation or pain. Zoophilia, a sexual fixation on non-human animals. Strangulation for sexual excitement, an extremely dangerous onanistic practice which has often resulted in the death of the practitioner. Frotteurism, the repetitive sexual urge to gain gratification by rubbing against another person, often acted out in public places. Necrophilia, or sexual attraction or sexual acts involving corpses. And pedophilia. Pedophilia deserves a special mention on account of the massive abuses perpetrated during decades by priests of the Catholic Church all over the world. It is technically defined by the WHO as a sexual preference for children, boys or girls, or both, usually of prepubertal or early pubertal age. It is said in the literature that pedophiles, of whom roughly 90% are men, must be at least 16 years old and must be at least 5 years older than the victim for it to technically qualify as pedophilia. Pederasty takes place when the victim is in his or her mid-teens. Ephebophilia, when the victim is in his or her post-pubertal age. And pedophilia proper takes place when the victim is of a prepubescent age. Now, the nature of pedophilia as a mental sexual disorder rather than a sexual orientation is sometimes contested. In fact, the APA had to issue a public rectification for having used the phrase sexual orientation in the pedophilia section of its 2013 Manual of Mental Disorders, which evidences the contestability of the concept. But what is it that makes for a sexual orientation that allows some to state that pedophilia falls or not under this label? Logically speaking, every kind of orientation must be aimed at an objective. In the case of sexual orientation, the Yogyakarta principles state that it amounts to an attraction toward individuals of a different gender or the same gender or more than one gender. Thus, sexual orientation proper cannot be experienced, say, toward an object, as in the paraphilia of fetishism, but only toward an individual on account of his or her gender. The American Psychological Association identifies 3 kinds of sexual orientation depending on the desired gender: heterosexuals feeling attracted to the opposite gender, homosexuals feeling attracted to the same gender, and bisexuals feeling attracted to both men and women. On this account alone, it may be said that pedophilia is but another kind of sexual orientation, as children are also individuals of a given gender towards whom the pedophile feels attracted, thereby existing heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual subtypes of pedophilia. It is also believed by many that pedophilia cannot be cured. Moreover, Human Rights Watch has pointed out that the concept of sexual orientation is a historical construct, and there are theories that propose that each specific kind of orientation, for instance homosexuality, is also culturally constructed. In this sense, might it not pedophilia become a socially constructed, acceptable kind of sexual orientation in the future? The truth is that sexual orientation, as defined in the Yogyakarta principles, has become now a term of art, conquered through painstaking political struggle by sexual minorities in the last decades. Therefore, the notion of sexual orientation should be preserved and respected as an achievement of the movement for the rights of the LGBTI community, much as the concept of human rights has become a household term in contemporary political language, thanks to the efforts of a human rights movement that thrived since the 1960s. Still, it is not enough to identify gender as the linchpin of sexual orientation, for it does not suffice to technically exclude conducts such as pedophilia from the notion. A rights perspective is needed. In order to fully respect the rights of others, including autonomous as well as non-autonomous persons under the care of others, and thus remain a morally acceptable concept, the Yogyakarta definition of sexual orientation should be rephrased as follows. Sexual orientation amounts to each person's capacity for profound emotional, affectional, and sexual attraction to, and to intimate and have sexual relations with, individuals of a different gender, or the same gender, or more than one gender, provided that such individuals are able to reciprocate and consent to said attraction. Thank you all for watching this class. Please visit mooccchile.com and we cordially invite you to watch our next lesson.